I'm a cognitive neuroscientist. My lab is called, what is it? I don't know my lab's name. Oh, Cognitive Neuroscience and Neuropsychology Lab. And when I started that lab, I sort of thought that I'd continue doing the sort of work that I was doing during my postdoc and towards the end of my PhD. And so let me give you a little bit of a picture of when I started my PhD. FMRI and brain imaging was pretty new. I mean, it wasn't new, but still you could, get a pretty good job if you were, learned your methods well. But these days, this game has changed completely. And it has become very, very much tied to better computational modeling. And so students who have very good computational and mathematical background are just absolutely necessary for the kind of neuroscience research. And you could think of my neuroscience research, which is, I'm going to talk about artificial social agents, such as robots and stuff. When you think about social cognition, it's all this, very high level kind of, I don't know if you've seen that XKCD cartoon about how pure sciences are, social interaction. It seems really high level, right? But really, the kind of mathematical and computational rigor we need to do this work and learn new things from it, you'd be surprised. And I hope to tell you a bit more about that. So my background, I studied math, and then I learned about this thing called cognitive science, and I thought, oh, that's what I want to do. And I didn't know how to transition because, I grew up in a different country where I didn't have interdisciplinary opportunities. So I started doing a master's in computer engineering. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll get a job and get paid decent money, or maybe I'll go into academia. Within months, I was in love with research. But I was going to do AI. And I realized that I didn't know really how we were going to model these things in computers, because we didn't really understand how they worked in the human. So I started doing my PhD in cognitive science here at UCSD. And cognitive science department is unique in that it is very interdisciplinary. So I started with this, computational mathy background, and I was going to do natural language processing, computational linguistics. But I just didn't know anything about the brain. I knew the front from the back because there's that wrinkly bit called the cerebellum. That's all I knew. So it was kind of an insane switch of interests to go and do something that I didn't know anything about. And I never really thought that, math, you always use it sort of, it's a way of thinking. But my AI research, I thought it was just a nice little chapter. I had a good background in AI, which is relevant. I had a good understanding of computational concepts, but I never really thought that they'd come back together. It turns out, so I became interested in how my research topic, how we understand body movements from very low level visual psychophysics to very high level things like social cognition. And interestingly, as I'll show you, the original AI research and my current research came together. Last year, a student who was applying to work with me as a graduate student, he was asking me this, this is so beautiful, you start with this AI stuff and then do all this neuroscience, and now all this has come together, how well crafted. And you think I planned that? I was just sort of faffing about doing things, and somehow they came together. What needed to happen was better computation, faster computation, and more crosstalk between computational people and neuroscientists. So a lot of people, I was originally going to talk to you about multiple different methods, which is very important, I think, to use different methods because they each have different strengths. A lot of people have reservations about especially FMRI, right? How many of you have know about FMRI to some degree? most of you, all of you. Do most of you have seen those blobs, pictures in newspapers or science magazines? But sort of like after a few years, there's something unsatisfying about all of that blobs, right? I showed subjects this area got activated. So we have already identified the main areas. There are no more experiments to do of the sort where you compare dogs to cats or faces to houses and so on. And the field got a little bit of a actual backlash. There are multiple reasons for this. One is what I call the sort of the prom queen, homecoming queen, prom king, whatever popular person you have in high school. And there's a little like Schadenfreude thing when you find out that they, didn't succeed, and you were a nerd, but you became a lot more successful, and they became, I don't know, something that doesn't impress you. There's just a little bit of like, so people who thought FMRI was this big fad and sucking away money from all this real serious neuroscience research, they really were like, aha, these people, they don't have anything more to say. And honestly, I don't even use FMRI that much, but my point here is that there is a lot we can learn from it. It is a really incredible technology if you just step away from all the hating. That, physics goes into it, biology goes into it, and the whole essence of it is actually modeling. The problem is, a lot of people were just sort of learning how to click the buttons on the software and not really knowing what they were doing with the data. And they were publishing these things in good journals, so people got like envious. They were like, I spent 5 years recording from neurons in this monkey, and you published a paper for like 4 months worth of work in Science. Well, let me tell you this, don't be jealous. Those days are over, completely over. I mean, maybe by accident, I won't claim it completely, but you just can't publish those simple things anymore. The field has moved towards using a lot more advanced methods in order to figure out not just where things are, right? We know where things are relatively well by now. But the problem is what computations are being carried out in those areas. How do they communicate with each other? How do they feed back and feed forward, negotiate perception? Those are the kinds of questions. It turns out that methods of using fMRI combined with machine learning or other kinds of modeling, and maybe you guys will come up with new ways to approach these data, really have been telling us new stuff that we didn't know. So there was like a little bit of time that everybody was jaded, including myself. But it is really time to seriously think about what we can learn from each method. You guys hopefully heard about EEG, which is a different neuroimaging method, which we also use. Again, EEG has been around for centuries, but we are still, due to advances in computational and mathematical modeling, we're learning new things from it all the time. So now all of that is sort of my main point. Just don't dismiss fMRI or in general cognitive neuroscience, something that seems high level. It might just be the kind of area that needs you guys' skills. Like when I'm looking for people for my lab, I'm looking for people with good computational skills, or they have to acquire them. So I will tell you a little bit about one research project, which is going to involve an fMRI study, but it also is an example of how we can ask questions that straddle multiple disciplines. So I told you a little bit about my background already. So this is what I studied and all of that I already told you. So bringing together neuroscience and AI. What do I mean by that? So the domain that we're looking at, the topic of our research, is how we understand other people. This is very important, and we do it all the time. I'm looking at you guys, I'm trying to determine if you guys are bored. You're looking at me, trying to determine how much more she's going to talk. Or you want to know whether somebody is, angry. Oh, no, not that one. Somebody's angry versus relaxed, and it's pretty important to approach the right primate at the right time, or you could get badly hurt. So, evolutionarily, every animal has to pay attention to other animals because you can eat them or be eaten by them. But especially in primates, including humans, this is an important cue for communication and social interaction and social well-being. So, yet, our social world has been changing. Our brains have evolved in a natural environment where we're not, used to seeing things like computers or robots, but yet we manage, right? Even television, is relatively recent. But there's been kind of the future, things that we see as futuristic are already happening. That's the future is now, but it's just not evenly distributed aspect of it. So we are having not only social partners that are not real biological entities, such as robots and avatars, but we also have bodies our bodies are changing. This is an artist, actually, Stellark. He's making a point about, the things that we can do. And he's been doing this stuff since the 60s or the 70s. He actually had an ear cultured and attached to his forearm. His main point is to show that it can be done. Obviously, these technologies mostly have uses for disabilities and medical populations, not just for art. However, all of these things are developing very fast, and we are going to have interactions with others that are not going to be human, such as robots and avatars. And we are going to be representing ourselves through such entities. So for example, hopefully in a few years, I won't have to come here to give this talk. I can just stay at home in my backyard. That's my goal. Well, so what is the problem? How can we, in particular, make entities or prosthetics or devices that people are going to use, they're going to want to use, right? Because what use is a home medical assistant if I don't want to engage with it? It's just not usable. So let's consider this, and I turned off the sound because this song will get stuck in your head. So this is, I don't know if you've seen this episode of South Park where Butters gets a robot friend, but it's actually another kid dressed in a robot costume called Osimo. And the thing here, I just want to evoke a picture of a kid that's so happy because he now has a robot friend. He's middle and small, doesn't judge me at all, my robot friend. So he's computing his way to my heart. So how can we make these machines compute their ways to our hearts? Is it easy? Is it hard? On the one hand, it shouldn't be so hard because we have been making things in our image for a very long time. Statues, dolls, creation myths. It seems like we're sort of driven to make these things in our image. Don't ask me why. It's not my area, but there seems to be a desire to do so. And also, as I said, our brains are very finely tuned for social things. So for example, in these images that are of non-living objects, you can see faces, right? Many of you, hopefully. And in this little video here, it's just a few shapes and some lines. But from their characteristic movements and the fact that they behave contingently towards each other, we seem to see a story there happening. One is chasing the other, and now it's come back into this room, and now this one and this one are happy that they left this one out. Now this one comes back in, and now this one's chasing, and oh no, sorry, they came out, now they're happily playing. We can, anybody not see this as kind of like an interactive thing? Then talk to me afterward, because you might be interesting. So what I mean is, even these like little shapes become socially meaningful for us. So why is it so hard to make AI that's going to really work? Well, we have so much more data and so much better methods. I mean, data science has blown up, sensors have gotten better, computations got faster, there's cloud computing, and the materials and the articulators for the robots and graphics, they're all just big achievements. Yet we still don't have that robot friend, right? So the idea there is people decide who is a friend, or who is intelligent, or who is conscious, or what have you. And this is pretty much, if you go back to, many of you probably have taken an introduction to computer science class that involved Alan Turing. His test of when do we know we've got AI? Well, we ask people, right? So do we understand how people do these things? So the domain that we work on, where we are just basically doing neuroscience without any AI at the moment, is action perception, how we understand body movements, that when I do this, I'm just waving at you, but when I do this, I'm not going to actually throw it. You can understand what I'm doing. Well, it's actually not a trivial problem, because when you see me doing that, your visual system is taking as input what's entering your retina, and yet you're making a connection to what that action means, and you can imitate me if you'd like. So you can make a link to what you see and what you do yourself. So at the very least, you're going to have to make a connection between visual areas of the brain and motor areas of the brain. And this action perception system, so you don't really need to worry about anatomy or like memorizing anything about this network. I'll show you this network a few times. These are the human brain areas that, not just with FMRI, I've spent, I think, a decade trying to identify these regions. These two regions that are orange here, premotor cortex and inferior parietal lobule. This is the front of the brain, does usually actiony things. Back of the brain does sensory processing. And then parietal cortex in the middle sort of does these very important coordinate transformations and modality transformations that sort of links the two. Because your perceptual areas have to work in concert with action areas, right? If you think about any kind of system in which there's information processing going on, you can have a system that only behaves, or you can have a system that only takes an input. But animals, they don't just take an input. Even if they choose to do nothing, they're always doing something with that input. So indeed, for action processing, there is this distributed network. Of course, there are more areas, but these are the most critical ones. So there are the more visual areas here marked in the yellow, and there are the more motor areas in the front, and this parietal cortex that connects them. Now, the thing to notice here is there are bidirectional anatomical connections between the visual areas and parietal area and the motor areas and the parietal area. There are no known direct connections between these two directly, except possibly in the marmoset, but that was just last year. I'm not sure I saw it as a poster. So in the humans at least, or macaques. So the way to think about this is, if you want to go from San Diego, oh, you guys are not Californians, right? We have awful public transportation here. If you want to take maybe some of you are, train from here to San Francisco, you can't. You have to go through Bakersfield. So this is kind of like that. If the visual areas that process actions want to connect to motor areas that perform actions, they have to go through Bakersfield, which is parietal cortex. And people always think I'm dissing parietal cortex. Parietal cortex is so important, but it just happens to match our messed up train system. So this is 10 years of my life in one slide. I've worked with these kinds of very sparse representations of actions because the stimuli are just, your ground truth is very simple. This is just basically like mocap data, but old-fashioned mocap. And you can see what this person is doing. People can tell gender, emotional state, all kinds of things from these kinds of very sparse animations. And basically with my PhD research showed that these very sparse representations also activated those visual and motor areas. And the bottom here, I don't have time to tell you the details about these awesome methods, is that this isn't activation. This is the probability that you will have a deficit in processing these things if you had a stroke that involved those areas. So the higher the hotter the color, the more correlation there was in a large sample of patients when that particular part of the brain was damaged to have problems with body motion processing. So that's important because this fMRI activity can be epiphenomenal. It could just be there but not really be critical. But if you also have it be associated with deficits in patients, then it's actually critical. So we've shown that these areas are critical, but now why are there multiple areas? What are they doing? And with fMRI, we have terrible temporal resolution, so we don't even know who is sending what message to whom. Although more recently, there are, again, computational theoretical ways you can model that. And that's another good area to apply you guys' skills. So at some point, I became interested in, point light. This is called point light biological motion. It's all great, everybody has a point light walker. It's a simple stimulus. I can control it very well and feel like, I know what I'm doing. But let's face it, we don't really see point light people around the world. So we don't just see motion. It's good to know that motion alone can characterize actions, but in real life, people usually have appearance also associated with them. And in this particular project, I'm interested in artificial agents. What if the behaving agent is a robot? Now, we talked about importance of how to develop a robot friend from the AI perspective. What's in it for a neuroscientist? The thing is, we are interested in the functional properties of these brain networks, right? What do they care about? What do they code for? So a robot can perform recognizable actions, such as this robot that's waving, but its appearance can vary. It could be more or less human-like. And currently, most robots have movement patterns that are not the same as animate beings. Animate motion can be modeled with equations that are nonlinear, whereas most robot movements are sort of clunky and sort of like robotic. Although there's work on that. But for my studies, I wanted the clunky robots because this gives me an opportunity to test whether these brain regions or the EEG signals, whatever signals that we're working with, are coding for human-like appearance, because hey, that's what we're used to processing, that's what we evolved to deal with. It's possible that there's selectivity for human-like appearance. Or do they code the kinematics of the movement? I mean, somewhere in the brain, these things are encoded, but we can't really dissociate them with natural stimuli, because people tend to look and move biologically. I hope that I have my videos working. So there have been people who looked at this. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention mirror neurons. Has everyone heard of mirror neurons? Just show me hands. Have you ever heard of it? A lot of people. Basically, these two areas here contain mirror neurons, meaning that they are activated when the monkey performs an action. It's a motor neuron. But then the same neuron fires when the monkey sees you performing the same action. So in essence, it's sort of representing other people's actions. This was a very exciting finding. And just like fMRI, got like a big backlash, mirror neurons also got a big backlash, because once they were discovered, it was really exciting in the sense that here is a neural computational resource that can bind us together. Like I literally simulate what you're doing with my own body's motor system. Maybe this is how we have empathy for each other. Maybe this is the basis for love and civilization and language. Could be, but people got kind of carried away, so they also drew a lot of criticism. So what needs to be done are like careful experiments, really looking at what these mirror neurons do, what these systems do, and really no neuron is an island, so what the system as a whole does. Okay, so in the case of humanoid robots, what we can learn from it is ask questions about things like, do mirror neurons care whether what I'm looking at is a human or not? And this has been actually looked at, but people usually use like just toys and not real robots. And we wanted to collaborate with a real robotics lab so that our research results are applicable to their endeavors as well. This is our collaborator Hiroshi Ishiguro. He's in Japan, in Osaka. This is him, and this is his android twin. And he makes these really, highly human-like robots that are based on real people. He started with his daughter, 5-year-old daughter, because the other robot platform he was working with, he noticed that his daughter was growing taller and taller and was almost matching the other robot. And he was like, we have to make her android copy right away. There's a video of the little girl, she's 5, just looks at this robot and just looks for a while, like for 30 seconds, and then just starts crying. I mean, can you imagine seeing your robotic doppelganger that your dad made? So, pretty wild. But a few years later, he was telling me, I'm going to make a copy of myself, because he has 2 labs and he didn't want to be going back and forth, so he really did it, and that's them. So we are using state-of-the-art robots, and we can manipulate both the appearance and the motion of the robots. So I'll show you that in just a second. But one thing that you do get when you start getting into this realm is called the uncanny valley. Anyone heard of the uncanny valley? Some of you have heard of it. Good. So I wasn't really thinking about dealing with this. I was thinking about, I'm going to test my hypotheses about whether the brain or this particular system cares about humans only or what. But one issue that you have is that the relationship between how human-like an artificial agent isn't, and how humans respond to it isn't linear. And this was first discussed in 1970. But there's earlier work by Freud and even earlier work discussing this concept of the uncanny. Not applied to robotics. Applied to robotics, it was discussed by this roboticist Mori. So the idea is, if this is x-axis is human likeness of the robot, and y-axis is reaction to the robot. An industrial robot is kind of not that engaging. A humanoid robot is good. Some human likeness is good. People respond to it more as an animate entity. But then the idea is that once you get really close to human, but not quite exactly natural, instead of a increased positive reaction, there is this dip into this so-called uncanny valley, where these agents can appear zombie-like or creepy, disgusting. These are kinds of the descriptions that have been made. Now, important to note that this lovely graph is a hypothesis, not data, and we're actually just barely scratching the surface of what that is. So basically, with our highly realistic robots, even though our interest was appearance and motion, we really have to consider the uncanny valley as well. So we're asking, are mechanisms for action perceptions adapted to our conspecifics? And there are claims that there are selectively only human mirroring. And we're asking what is the role of a biological appearance and what is the role of biological motion. So hopefully these will work. Okay, so this is the android that we worked with, and she makes upper body, face, arm movements, some facial expressions, and she's modeled after this lady. And the human lady is a TV presenter. So what she's doing is sort of like, welcome to the show, today we have, and that kind of movement, in case you're wondering what she's doing. But if you notice, the appearance is quite impressive, but the motion is kind of jerky and not quite human. It's not super creepy, but it's not quite right. Anyway, so I went to Japan, and I videotaped both of these agents performing the same actions. And I was also going to videotape robot-looking robots to test our hypotheses. But of course, I'm kind of a visual perception kind of person, so I became obsessed with, we have to control for things. This robot's a totally different size. So we did something even better. This robot that they painstakingly made human-like through several days of faffing about and buying random things from the 99-cent store and trying to, it was easy to remove the clothing and reveal the machinery, but the face couldn't be removed and the hair. So we had to be creative and cover the skin, silicone skin, and then reveal the sort of mechanics underneath. The point is, at first sight, this looks like a human. At first sight, this is not a human. But their motion, their kinematics is going to be completely identical because they are the same robot. All right, so we now have then an action database where same actions are done by the robot, the android, and the human. And I'm going to call these robot and android even though they're the same agent. So in terms of appearance, in terms of appearance, these two differ, mechanical, human, but they have the same kinematics. And in terms of motion, these two differ. This one moves with real human motion dynamics, and this one does not. But they share biological appearance. So we can compare these conditions to see if the brain cares about these things. But there's this other, so in this schema of form and motion, appearance and motion, the robot and the human are the furthest apart from each other. They don't have anything in common, right? The android has something in common with both of them. But they have one thing in common where the android features incongruent form and motion. What I mean by that is this looks like a robot, moves like a robot. This looks like a human, moves like a human. This looks like a human, moves like a robot. So that's one way in which the android is different. We did an FMRI study where we put a subject in a strong magnetic field, and we can't put metal in there. If you had my longer talk, you would have seen watermelons being smashed just to show how strong the magnetic field is, because it's exponential. So we can't really put the robots in there. People are just in a very passive situation of watching these robot videos on the screen. And they know which one is a robot, which one is a human. They might find the android uncanny, but they're not freaked out the whole time because they're seeing the same videos over and over again. Has anyone been a subject in an FMRI study? So you know how it is kind of boring, after a while, even if the stimuli are exciting over and over and over. So these subjects are watching these action agents. They're not even being social. But yet the brain still represents these agents differentially. Now at the bottom is the human, top is the robot. All the agents have activation in this lateral temporal, the visual area that we talked about, our San Diego area, let's say. That's what we would expect. That's an area that's always very interested in moving bodies. But the human and the robot, despite differing in a lot of aspects, even if you look at the image statistics, they're much more different than these two. they look more similar to each other. And the android is instead sort of sticking out. Now here I'm actually using a method I won't tell you in detail called FMRI adaptation or repetition suppression. So it's not just comparing what's activated, but it is actually looking at what codes for action and is different between these agents. So even if you don't know much about the brain, just looking at these pictures, you can tell that just a lot more is going on with this agent over here. And of course, we did the right kind of statistics. There was one piece that was actually interested in humans only, human appearance only, and that's an area called extrastriate body area that likes bodies. So that's, but by and large, everything else did not show that result. Instead, we got this android being the odd one out. So the responses to the robot and the human were very similar. This is the suppression. And then the android was significantly higher. And where? In parietal cortex in Bakersfield. So if you thought like a localizationist who thought, oh, this is a face area, this is the shoe area, you could say, well, this is the intraparietal android area, right? But that doesn't make any sense. How could such a thing evolve? So we have to think about it differently. And indeed, we think, we notice that this area is indeed what we talked about is part of this action network. Now, why would you get more activation in this area than the others for this android? Now, remember what I said about, so this is just a summary of the results. By the way, this mirror, the classic mirror neuron area, this premotor cortex, it was activated, but it didn't care who it was. And we've replicated that with other methods as well. So this part doesn't seem to care about the specific properties of the stimuli. The visual areas do, but this parietal cortex seems to be responding to the case where there's a mismatch. Now, this is something that brings us to predictive coding. Look this up. He is...
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Probably 5 more minutes.
Yeah, I'm at the end. So in predictive coding, the idea is that you have a network of areas, whatever it is, language that's being processed. And in each higher up area actually creates a prediction of the input that would be coming from the lower areas. And when the input actually comes, the area compares the response that it predicted to the response that it actually got. And if it got an unexpected response, feed forward input coming in, information coming in, and its prediction was something else, there's going to be a difference between those two, and a prediction error will be generated and sent back. So the area will say downstream, send a feedback signal saying, this doesn't quite add up. Do something and send it back to me. And so the network works until it minimizes free energy. So this is like literally these papers. This paper is a classic computational vision paper. This one, he really like explicitly terms the whole thing as a free energy principle. So basically, the brain network is trying to minimize the prediction error across the nodes. So in the context of this android thing, right, when you see an agent that has a human appearance, and this is not a conscious thing, because you know that this is a robot. You've seen it, you've learned it. But part of your brain is saying, well, that's a face, that's a body, that's a person. And that part of the brain will, send signals upstream and say, hey, a human. And another area say that processes body motion, says, well, humans typically move like this. This agent isn't moving like that. So there will be a prediction error. In the case of a robot, there won't be much of a prediction error. One, because we probably don't have very strong priors to generate predictions about robot behavior. And for humans, we have very strong priors about how they behave because we see them all the time. So in essence, the android gets too close to human territory, right? It's evoking expectations of humanness, but not fulfilling them. And in our case, this experiment, we've just done it with motion, but you could think of other aspects of behavior, voice, appropriateness. So right now, what we have arrived at is basically a way to think about this uncanny valley thing, which is this like vague, weird concept that people don't even want to touch, because how are we going to study it? We might actually be able to simply model it as a special case of predictive coding and Bayesian inference in the brain, which would be great because then we can do sane experiments. And that's kind of where we're going with EEG. I'm not going to go over the data because EEG gives us temporal precision, so we can sort of try to figure out when the error signals are being generated. And also, as I said, EEG allows us to actually have, this is the Einstein robot here at UCSD. This is currently in our lab. We're having people wear EEG caps. You can't do it with FMRI, but we can do it with EEG, where they're going to be in front of the robot where we record brain activity. And then in another condition, they're going to see exactly the same thing on the screen. So we can get a sense of a more realistic social interaction. Of course, I purposefully did not show you the full scale of appearance and motion combinations agents can have. So we have a lot of parametric variability here to play with, and we will do so with animations. But in general, this idea of prediction violations, as I said, there are other examples of it, if you think about it, where you have, this dog-human hybrid thing. Your brain's like, or people who are too heavily plastic surgeried or Botoxed. For me, at least, it creates a similar feeling of like, you seem to be angry, but your face isn't moving. So, it might just be a special case. So, synthetic stimuli can help us precisely control these things and create priors, essentially, that we can then perturb and see what happens in the brain. And therefore, by doing so, we learn about what the brain is coding, whether the brain is coding for, and so far it seems like the brain is not actually coding for humans only or biological motion only, but rather it's a dynamic system that tries to work across the nodes in a way that considers prior probabilities and new information coming in. And that is the end of my talk, which this work was supported by Kavli Institute, KelIT, and importantly NSF, and this is my wonderful lab. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions, those were supposed to wave at you, but the videos aren't working. If you have any questions, let me know.
Let's thank Ayse for your time.